Rabaul, New Britain. September 2nd, 1943. The tent is hot, the paper damp. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai pauses over an intelligence sheet and laughs. A new American carrier fighter. The report says, heavy like a bomber, broad-shouldered like a transport, a Hellcat, twice the weight of a Zero. Through the flaps, the flight line shimmers. A6M Zeros slim spinners. Long wings sit nose to wind on pierced steel planking. Ground crew move with practiced economy. Pilots trade quick jokes. Confidence is a habit here. For 2 years that confidence has had numbers behind it. Since late 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service has posted exchange ratios that stunned Allied staff's Pearl Harbor's tally. The Philippines, even Darwin. The pattern felt reliable: climb early, turn inside, fire short, controlled bursts, light structure, low wing loading, long range. The A6M rewarded finesse and punished mistakes. Sakai reads on. The Americans have armored the pilot. Self-sealing tanks, 650 caliber Brownings, a big radial up front. All of it sounds like excess mass to a Zero pilot. Mass is drag, drag is lost angles. No one in this tent expects a lumbering newcomer to survive a turning fight over the Bismarck Sea. But the flight line hides the trade-offs that made the Zero brilliant. Speed in the horizontal, yes. Tight turns at modest altitude, yes. Protection, little. Fire hard. Leave early. Avoid dives that steal energy you can't buy back. The A6M is a rapier in a theater that increasingly rewards hammers. What no one sees yet is how the Americans intend to fight. Not duel for circles, but manage energy, not chase bravado, but follow vectors, radio, controllers, altitude stacks. A carrier force that treats fighters as one instrument, not 18 separate blades. Sakai folds the report. The room relaxes. Outside. A Zero coughs to life. Then another. Maps still favor Japan. Sorties still roll on time. If the Hellcat is heavy, it must be slow. If it is slow, it must be doomed. 30 days can be a long time in a changing air war, long enough for a fat fighter to arrive, and for arithmetic to shift. Sources for segment naval history and heritage command battle summaries. F6F overview. Smithsonian NASM. A6M design notes. U.S. Naval Institute features on early Pacific air combat and fighter direction. What if perfection on paper hides a hole you can't armor? American engineers who examined early captured Zeros in 1942 were stunned. Here was a single-engine fighter with bomber-like range, low wing loading, and knife-edge agility at modest speeds. It felt, by contemporary standards, improbable. The secret wasn't magic. It was discipline in weight. Mitsubishi's use of extra super duralumin, sparse systems, and ruthless trimming produced an airframe far lighter than most Western contemporaries. Pilot armor. Often absent. Self-sealing tanks. Not on the earliest marks. Even radios came and went to shave pounds. The payoff was reach and maneuver. The price was resilience. Japanese pilots felt that payoff every sortie. Accounts from aces describe an airplane that answers intent, rewarding smooth hands and energy kept in a narrow band, in early war skies where opponents arrived in heavier, less coordinated types. That philosophy looked vindicated. Then, in early 1943, intelligence desks began passing around specifications for a new U.S. Navy fighter, the Grumman F6F. The figures relayed through neutral channels and open reporting looked like propaganda. Big radial engine, 650 caliber guns with deep ammunition belts, armor glass and plates, self-sealing tanks as standard, a loaded weight far above the Zero, to officers steeped in turn rate doctrine. It read like proof the Americans still built fighters like trucks. Captain Minoru Genda, The staff mind behind Pearl Harbor's air plan reviewed the sheets at Combined Fleet. He didn't need to see the airplane to run the math. Wing loading up, turning circle up, a 0, flown well. Should carve inside such a machine at will. In that logic tree, the Hellcat was heavy, and heavy meant late to the merge and helpless in the circle. Numbers seemed to agree. Plot a notional 0 at low 20s lb per FT2 wing loading against a US. Type in the mid-30s, and the turning radius widens dramatically. Tactics anchored on flat turns and low to medium altitude would favor the lighter airframe on paper. But paper fights assume both sides play the same game. The Japanese, reading those pages, measured turn. The Americans designing the Hellcat were measuring energy, survivability, and control from the ship. Two philosophies were about to meet, and one of them didn't intend to turn at all. Sources segment Smithsonian NASM, notes on A6M, design trade-offs, naval history and heritage command profiles of F6F program and armament, U.S. Naval Institute, discussions of Minoru Genda and IJN fighter doctrine, contemporary U.S. test summaries of captured A6M performance interpret with variant caveats. They expected a lumbering target. It went straight up. Marcus Island, September 30th, 1943. Petty Officer First Class Yoshio Fukui flies escort for a photo run. Canopy cracked, eyes on haze. 6 dark blue shapes climb from the southeast. At first glance, he files them mentally as medium bombers wrong heading, wrong look. Then they bank, 1 engine each, broad fuselages, wings that seem short for the bodies. His note later reads, first sighting of a new U.S. Navy type, likely F6F. Standard playbook engages, use the Zero's low wing loading, roll, dive, force the heavier fighter to overshoot, slide to 6 o'clock and finish at short range. Fukui commits. He drops into a curving, descending turn, expecting the American to stay flat and fast. Instead, the blue fighter pitches its nose skyward, no attempt to match the circle, no panic brake, just power and climb. That decision is the surprise. The F6F carries a Pratt & Whitney R. Wartime fuel. A Zero's Sakai gives roughly U-100 HP. Rate of climb favors the heavier machine if it keeps energy. Fukui chases uphill. Airspeed bleeds. Controls lighten. The deck falls away, around 15,000 ft. The American yaws the nose through a tight. Pivoting turn what Western pilots call a hammerhead, and drops in trail. Tracers lance past. Not 4 guns, 6. 50 caliber Brownings with deep belts. Fukui feels impacts along the right wing and aft fuselage. He shoves the stick forward and kicks rudder into an incipient spin, buying vertical separation the only way left. The Zero shudders, then recovers. Fuel smell, holes in the skin. He makes Marcus with minutes of luck to spare. His wingman does not return. The reconnaissance aircraft does not either. Mini-beat, lesson 1. The newcomer refuses the turn. It chooses the vertical, where power and mass convert to safety and angles. 5 days later. October 5th, 1943. Another test. Task Force 14. Strikes. Wake Island. Records place 252nd Air Group Zero's sources often cite only Yoshio Shiga climbing to meet what looks like another raid to swat and wave off. 12 Hellcats hold formation below. Altitude favors the defenders, so do position and surprise. The Japanese section rolls into diving attacks across the formation. The expected outcome is fragmentation, a dogfight of many circles. It doesn't happen. The blue fighters stay disciplined. They ease into a shallow, accelerating dive, preserving energy. Long-range bursts from above nick paint and armor glass, but do not break the line. Protection matters now, pilot backplates, bullet-resistant windscreens, self-sealing tanks that shrug off hits which once meant flames. As the Zeros complete their first passes, ammunition already lighter, the F6Fs turn the fight on their terms. Full power, climb to clean air where the Sakai begins to lose its edge. At $25,000 an EFT, an R-2800 still pushes strong war emergency power. A Zero, optimized for lower altitudes and lightness, struggles to follow without stalling margin. Then the pattern repeats. Dive from above, short, controlled bursts from 6 guns, break up and away before a turn develops, regroup by radio. Do it again. Japanese after-action notes capture the shock the enemy uses weight not as a handicap, but as a weapon. More speed in the dive, more protection to stay in the envelope, more ammo to sustain slashing passes. Accounts from the day list multiple Zeros downed and no F6Fs lost in that exchange awake an outcome that forces a question inside briefing tents across the Central Pacific. Mini-beat, Lesson 2. Turning contests can be denied. When interceptors fight as teams, under direction, and manage energy, the duel many pilots trained for never actually starts. They stopped turning. They started harvesting energy. Raboul. 11 November 1943, in a canvas tent behind the revetments. Veterans of the 204th Air Group study a new pattern in the air war. Takeo Tanemizu, one of the few who has tangled with the blue U.S. and Navy fighters and lived, doesn't talk about braving tighter circles. He talks about refusing them. What he's seen is simple and ruthless. The Hellcat doesn't try to out-twist a Zero. It tries to never enter a turning fight. Elements fly as pairs, one high, one covering low. They keep altitude in the bank and airspeed on hand, convert potential into kinetic in a single slashing pass, then climb back to clean air before a Zero can cash in its low-wing loading. Radios make the timing crisp, while you fixate on the lead. The wingman is already rolling in from a higher perch. It feels less like a duel and more like vector control, a fleet's hand guiding a fighter's blade. A month later, Truk Chuk Lagoon, December 1943. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, now on staff duty, inspects aircraft that limped home from Hellcat encounters. The gap is more than tactics, it's hardware. The F6F carries 6 50 cal Browning M2s, roughly 750 RPM each, about 4,500 rounds per minute, across the battery with heavy. High-velocity bullets around 45 to 48 kilometers per 10, 46 to 48 gri each, leaving the muzzle near 2,900 FT per CS. Ammunition depth lets U.S. pilots make multiple short, disciplined bursts per pass. Armor plate and bullet-resistant glass keep pilots alive long enough to finish the intercept. Self-sealing tanks turn what used to be fatal hits into manageable leaks. The Zero's standard early midwear fit 2 7.7mm machine guns, plus 2 20mm cannon can bite hard. But with lighter rifle caliber rounds up front, and cannon with lower rate and limited ammo. The window for effect is narrow and often tied to a turning solution, if that turning fight never happens. Firepower on paper becomes firepower out of position. Then there is what crews at Truk cannot see but increasingly feel radar-directed fighter direction. Shipboard sets push long-range plots to controllers who stack combat air patrols and vector them with altitude, bearing, and sun advantage. One Japanese pilot later wrote of being hit out of cloud with no warning enemy fighters arriving exactly on our heading. Already fast, already above. Tanemizu's briefing proves prophetic. The Americans have changed the rules. The question isn't who turns tighter. It's who dictates whether anyone turns at all. Skill erodes fastest when fuel runs out. January 1944, the pilot equation flips. Pre-war, The Imperial Navy's schoolhouse was famously exacting records, suggest multi-year courses with hundreds of flight hours, often cited near 700 for Navy, 500 for Army, aerobatics, deflection gunnery, formation discipline, instrument work, radio procedures, the full craft. By early 1944, the pipeline is compressed, fuel is scarce, training flights shrink, glider time replaces powered sorties, gunnery practice can be rationed to token belts, hardly enough to build feel. Radio discipline and night work fall off the syllabus to push wings to the front. Most historians argue new naval aviators might reach units with roughly 300 hours. Army flyers, closer to 200, with large variants by cohort. Across the ocean, the U.S. pipeline expands. Carrier trainees typically arrive with 300 hours and recent time in type, after thousands of practice rounds, all-weather pattern work, and repeated simulated interceptions. The new doctrine energy, fighting, and section tactics gets drilled over safe fields long before combat. A training officer's lament from the period captures the gap without embellishment. We are sending boys against professionals. It's less about courage than currency fresh hours, live ammo, working radios, and enough fuel to make mistakes while learning. October 12-16, 1944. Formosa. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome's Second Air Fleet throws everything to blunt fast carrier raids, 700-plus aircraft, including the last well-schooled cadres from the homeland. The claims on the radio sound triumphant, multiple carriers and heavy ships sunk, hundreds of enemy planes downed. Post-strike tallies tell a colder story. U.S. Losses run under 100 aircraft for the week. Japanese losses climb into the high hundreds, including many of the remaining experienced leaders. Surviving pilots describe a sky divided into stacks, Hellcat divisions at layered altitudes, vectored by radar. Arriving with speed and sun advantage, climb, and they are above you, dive, and they are already below. The fight feels less like a melee than a grid, patrolled and serviced on schedule. Mini-beat. Lesson 3. Training and direction. Multiply. By autumn 1944, the decisive margin isn't a single duel. It's a system that never lets the duel begin. They came to outrange us. We answered by outdirecting them. June 19, 1944. Philippine Sea, Japan commits its rebuilt carrier force under Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa to Operation Ago, the long-awaited decisive blow. Roughly 9 carriers and about 450 aircraft move to engage. Facing them. Task Force 58. 15 carriers with close to 1,000 aircraft, nearly half of them F6F Hellcats on combat air patrol and strike escort. Just after dawn. American radar paints inbound groups at long range, roughly 150 miles out. Controllers begin to vector layered cap, divisions stack between 20,000 and 30,000 feet. Sun advantage set. Approach angles chosen to avoid the Zero's sight lines. A Japanese escort leader later recalls seeing at least 60 blue fighters ahead. A steel curtain across the sky. The first clash is fast and organized. One wave about 60-plus aircraft meets disciplined intercepts. In minutes, dozens go down. The method is familiar now. High-side run. Short bursts from 6 Biston 50 cals. Zoom climb back to altitude when pursued. The Zero bleeds energy and stalls margins. Another Hellcat element finishes the pass. Through the day. Records show heavy Japanese losses, hundreds of carrier and land-based aircraft against limited U.S. losses. In ready rooms that evening, pilots coin the term that will stick: the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The label is blunt, but the meaning is clinical radar direction. Training and energy tactics have shifted the air war's arithmetic. October 24th, 1944. Lady Gulf. Commander David McCampbell, SEAG of Air Group 15 on USS Essex, launches short-handed with his wingman, Enzip Roy rushing. They intercept a large force, roughly 60 aircraft, closing on the fleet. For 90 minutes. McCampbell applies the same playbook refined since the Marianas climb for position. One pass, one kill, climb again. He downs 9 aircraft, 5 Zeros, and 4 bombers before his ammunition runs dry. Rushing claims 6. Their section returns without a hit on McCampbell's Hellcat. The feat becomes a Navy record for a single sortie and helps secure McCampbell the Medal of Honor, with prior actions contributing and the Navy Cross. More than an anecdote. It's a snapshot of the new Balance II U.S. MAR. Fighters disrupting a much larger strike through altitude control, radios and restraint, aftershock psychology and pipeline. The twin hammer blows Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf echo inside surviving IJN ready rooms. Reports speak of a fight that feels industrialized, each Hellcat a component of a larger machine. Radar plots, controllers, deck cycles, logistics rather than a lone duelist. As attrition bites, the training pipeline constricts further. By early 1945, sources describe new Navy pilots with dozens of hours, not hundreds. Kamikaze air crews receive minimal instruction measured in days. The result is a widening performance gap at the very moment strategy demands mass. Mini-beat. What 1944? Decided range and agility once set the terms. In 1944, direction and discipline did. The decisive contests were not swirling knife fights, but managed intercepts, energy conserved, passes timed, formations held, after the Marianas and Leyte. Air superiority in the Central and Western Pacific no longer hinged on who could turn tighter. It hinged on who could keep the fight on plan. When the fight became a flood, the Hellcat turned into a dam. April-June 1945. Operation Iceberg Okinawa. Japan commits roughly 1,900 kamikaze sorties against the U.S.'s fleet. Carrier fighters stop being hunters only. They become defenders on a clock. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia leads his flying circus in a pattern built for massed threats. 4 Hellcats, line abreast. About 100 yards between ships, high speed, 1 pass, climb, reset, repeat. He later called it the mowing machine. Each pilot owns a lane. No one chases. The method punishes loosely escorted formations and minimizes exposure to guns and rams. By campaign's end, Valencia's tally reaches 23, but the bigger story is the system his division embodies. The numbers at Okinawa are cold and clarifying. Hellcats fly about 38 combat sorties. Claim roughly 351 victories for 249 losses, a ratio near 9.5:1. More important for ships under attack, fighter cover and radar control keep an estimated 80% of kamikaze aircraft from reaching targets. Not perfection. Enough to keep the fleet fighting. Meanwhile, the technology gap is now a chasm. Late-war F6F airframes add water injection power boosts, 2,200 HP, strengthened protection, zero-length rocket stubs for strikes, and lead computing gun sights that simplify deflection shots. Rugged airframes soak damage and still trap aboard at dusk. Even elite opponents feel the shift. Ace Saburo Sakai later recalled his first Hellcat encounter mid-1944. He threw everything at it loops, rolls, split S, the full bag, and still barely escaped. His conclusion was blunt. The American survived an error, fighting with a drop tank still on. Without that mistake, the margin might have closed differently. By 1945, those margins belong mostly to the heavier fighter, flown in teams, directed by radar, and built to take hits while protecting the pilot who will fly again tomorrow. Mini-beat Lesson 4 at Okinawa. Quantity plus direction plus survivability beat zeal. In the end, the strongest weapon wasn't a wing, it was a system, human cost. Tallied, by war's end, Navy records credit the F6F Hellcat with roughly 5,100 plus aerial victories in U.S. Service often cited near 156 with a Navy-wide kill ratio 19:1. The type produced 300 plus U.S. Navy aces and accounted for the majority of Navy air-to-air credits. Figures vary by source and method, but the direction is clear: one aircraft, nested in a fleet system, did disproportionate work. Across the water, the numbers cut deeper. Of some 18,000 Imperial Japanese Navy aviators who began the war, fewer than 100 truly experienced combat pilots remained by August 1945, according to post-war Japanese and Allied assessments. The gap is not only machines, it is training hours, fuel, radios, radar plots, and the ability to survive a first mistake and fly again tomorrow. Kamikaze, as a grim equation. By late 1944, a hard truth sat on every plotting table. Conventional strike packages bled away against radar-directed combat air patrols and layered anti-aircraft screens. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, associated with formalizing kamikaze operations, framed the turn in stark probabilities a zero. Approaching conventionally had a minimal chance of breaking through as a one-way weapon. The chance rose, still uncertain, but no longer negligible. It was a logic of exhaustion, not triumph. On October 25, 1944, Ace Hiroyoshi Nishizawa escorted the first officially organized attacks, led by Lieutenant Yukio Seki, and reportedly claimed additional victories that day, the next afternoon. October 26th, flying as a passenger in a transport. Nishizawa died when U.S. carrier fighters, Hellcats among them, intercepted the aircraft. One of Japan's most storied pilots, unarmed in transit, was lost to the very system his skills could sometimes defy. That is the shape of late-war attrition. Even talent can be outflanked by process. A final August broadcast, and a last intercept. August 15, 1945. The Emperor's voice carries over Japan. On airfields like Atsugi, the remaining aircraft stand in harsh light-patched skins. Short fuel, crews too young, too tired, or simply too few. Post-war summaries often cite a VF-31 Hellcat from USS Below Wood claiming a Yokosuka D4Y Judy after midday on the 15th, sometimes described as the Pacific War's last air-to-air kill. Some records differ on whether it was the final victory. The day is crowded with confusion. What is not in dispute, organized carrier air power, remained lethal even as the guns fell silent by order. Occupation, seeing the machine up close. September 1945. Atsugi. Among the first U.S. aircraft to land are Navy fighters, F6Fs among them. Japanese pilots and ground crew gather along the line to study what they had fought for years at a distance. U.S. aviators demonstrate climbs, quick rolls, power-on approaches, and forgiving traps. The point is less bravado than pedagogy. This airplane is built to take a beating and still bring the pilot home. Pilots talk casually about water injection power, about self-sealing tanks, about armor that buys time. The message is quiet, but unmistakable. Survivability is not an afterthought, it is a design goal. Engineering post-mortem interchangeable parts versus hand-fitting. Post-war technical teams compare two engineering cultures under stress. On the U.S. side, the Pratt & Whitney R2800, thousands of precision parts, designed for interchangeability, built for depot rotation. On the Japanese side, the Nakajima Sakai, ingenious, efficient, but increasingly constrained by material quality and production disruption. More hand-fitting. More variability between engines. Designer Jiro Horikoshi, who led the A6M program, would later frame it succinctly: Japan optimized a brilliant 1941 solution. The United States built a 1945 system. Both statements can be true, and yet only one scales into late-war reality. The production miracle. As strategy, Grumman's Bethpage lines run day and night. At peak, Workers complete a new Hellcat in about an hour, a shorthand for a larger truth parts flow, shift work, quality control, and a logistics net that keeps ships stocked forward. Total output reaches 12 275 Hellcats, most of them delivered in roughly 2 to 3 years. In 1944, U.S. factories produced tens of thousands of fighters across types. Japan's totals are a fraction, constrained by raw materials, bombing, and shipping losses. The point isn't to deride a foe. It is to understand why carriers could sortie again tomorrow, and then next week, and then again each time with spares, fresh engines, and pilots who had practiced the exact landing that night before in a stateside trainer. Production is not the backdrop. It is a weapon. Strategy. Inverted. Before the war, conventional wisdom held that carriers were glass cannons deadly if they struck first, fragile if caught. By 1944-45, the U.S. fast carrier force flips that script, with Hellcat umbrellas stacked high and deep. Task groups can remain on station, weather raids, recover, and launch again. Fighter direction officers on CIC scopes turn radar plots into time-on-top intercepts, keeping the cap replenished as decks cycle. The Hellcat is the visible tip of a series of invisible advantages: radio discipline, standardized procedures, deck choreography, tanker plans, repair ships, and intelligence loops. A duel becomes traffic control with teeth, culture without caricature. It is tempting to summarize the shift as warriors versus machines, but that flattens both sides. Japanese naval aviation in 1941-42 showcased remarkable skill, courage, and innovation. American carrier air groups in 1944-45 also housed individual virtuosos, but they couched talent inside repeatable process. What changed the Pacific Air War was not a mystical quality. It was institutional learning, error-tolerant aircraft, pilot survival, doctrine that discouraged ego chases, and a command climate that prized direction over duel. For pilots taught to accept a turning fight as a test of honor, refusing one could feel alien, yet refusal, climb, reset. Reattack is exactly what kept U.S. pilots alive to fight a second, third, or fourth pass. That is a cultural adjustment as much as a tactical one. How historians judge it now. In post-war conferences and museum panels, veterans and scholars keep reaching for the same idea: the Hellcat was not only a good airplane, it was the right airplane for a particular fleet and a particular moment. Many credit it with the lion's share of Navy air-to-air victories. Others remind us that Corsairs, Avengers, Dauntlesses, submarines, codebreakers, and logistics all braided into the outcome. Both points are true. The Hellcat's scoreboard makes headlines. The system that enabled it wins wars. The reckoning, in plain math. Summaries you will see in reputable sources look like this. Kill ratio approximately 19:1 in U.S. Navy service methodologies differ. Production, 12. 275 F6Fs built. Share of Navy air-to-air credits the majority, often cited around 3/4. By late 1945, Japan's pool of seasoned naval pilots nearly gone, training pipelines truncated by fuel and time. This is not triumphalism. It is arithmetic written in steel and octane. A final word, minus the slogans. Pilots once laughed at the Hellcat's bulk. They had good reasons to trust the A6M. It earned that trust early. But the battlefield moved. Radios mattered, radar mattered, armor mattered. A fighter that refused the wrong kind of fight mattered most. If there is a single lesson to carry forward, it is this: an aircraft can be elegant, even brilliant, and still be mismatched to a later phase of a war. Another can look blunt, but fit perfectly into a system that protects the pilot, saves the deck crew effort, and gives commanders tools to shape the fight. The Hellcat was that second kind. It didn't win because it was pretty. It won because the Pacific by 1944 rewarded process over flourish. Mini-beat, legacy in 4 lines. A rugged fighter that brought its pilots home. A fleet that turned radar plots into action. A factory that delivered airframes like clockwork. An opponent whose skill could not outlast attrition without fuel. Time and replacements. In the quiet after surrender. Airfields like Atsugi and carriers riding at anchor tell the same story. The last victories did not belong to a single pilot's hands, as much as to a network that multiplied each hand. That is the Hellcat's legacy, not merely a tally, but a template.